Hi folks, my name is Dave and welcome to my video series on Jordan and Israel. Very excited about this one today as we're going to be at the northern end of the Sea of Galilee, and we're going to start off at a place called Seven Springs, which is where Jesus called his first disciples. Go down the road a little bit to Capernaum, and this is where Jesus called his hometown during his ministry. Then we're going to go over to the west side of the Sea of Galilee to Tiberias, where we're going to go on a boat ride out on the Sea of Galilee. From there, we're going to go up north a little bit to Magdala, and this is Mary Magdalene's birthplace, but also a very, very cool archaeological find. And from there, we're going to take a quick dunk in the Jordan River. As I mentioned, the Sea of Galilee is at the center of our day today. It is the most painted location in the history of art, and I gotta tell you, it's gorgeous. To better understand where we're headed today, we need to take a look at where Jesus spent his time during his ministry. If you watched my previous video, we left off at Nazareth, which is located right here in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. This was the village where Jesus grew up, and he called Capernaum his home during his ministry at the north end of the lake. Did I say lake? Yep. The Sea of Galilee is also known as Lake Kinneret, also known as Lake Tiberias, and it's a freshwater lake. Before we go any further, I need to tell you what happened to me this morning before we even got on the bus. You know how love sneaks up on you sometimes when you're not even looking for it? Well, that's what happened to me. I fell in love with a hot Israeli dish. Her name is shashuka, and she was bathed in tomato sauce, and I love her very much. Oh, shashuka, where have you been all my life? I hope to see you very, very soon. Jesus started his ministry when he was 30 years old, and a majority of his time over the next 2.5 years would be spent in this area, from Tiberias on the west side to Christi on the east side. Christi is where he healed a demon-possessed man by casting his demons into a large herd of pigs, which then ran down a steep embankment and drowned in the Sea of Galilee. Of course, Jesus also traveled throughout the Jezreel Valley, Decapolis, Perea, Samaria, Judea, and of course in Jerusalem. But today, we're going to focus right here, starting at Seven Springs. The Sea of Galilee receives water from an area 16 times as large as the lake itself, from Mount Hermon to the north, the Golan Heights, and the Upper Galilee area. There are large springs at the foot of Mount Hermon, with the biggest spring being the Dan. The Dan is the beginning of the Jordan River. Aha! And we'll be visiting the Dan in our next video. Believe it or not, there were 7 springs that fed this area called Seven Springs. Some of those springs produce warmer water than the temperature of the Sea of Galilee, and that produces algae, which in turn attracts the fish. So, if you ever wondered why Peter, Andrew, James, and John were found fishing here, or why Jesus came to this place to find his first disciples, now you know. Water from these springs were used to power several flour mills, as well as being used for irrigation. When the water level was very low in the 1970s, a small harbor was discovered here, which served the millers and fishermen at Jesus' time. For some good news, as of April 2020, the Sea of Galilee is just 5 inches from being at full capacity. When that happens, the dams that regulate the water flow into the Jordan River will be opened wide. More on that later. With all the great fishing right here, and with the Via Maris nearby, this area was a transit zone. The Via Maris was the ancient trade route from Egypt to Syria. Ever heard of the Fertile Crescent? And it was the #1 ancient highway. All the rivers that went into the lake were also used as trade routes. The merchants used these trade routes and carried the news of the day from one location to another. Have you ever wondered why Jesus' ministry should be here in the middle of the desert versus anywhere else in the world? Well, from here, the gospel spread worldwide. Fishermen were the Uber service of the day. You need a ride from here to there, you hop a ride with a fisherman. You have a package that needs to get from one side of the lake to the other? You give it to a fisherman. Remember, Israel was the gateway to Africa, Asia, and Europe, and fishermen had a captive audience. They would tell people about what Jesus was doing all around the Sea of Galilee, and that news would spread throughout the world. Standing on the shore at Seven Springs feels like you're able to imagine what Jesus saw somewhat. Now, what we're seeing is a very tranquil, relaxed setting, and as I mentioned before, this place was Grand Central Station in Jesus' time. But I can see the fishing boats, and I can imagine the hustle and bustle, and I can imagine standing right here and calling out to the fishermen in their boats just a few yards away. This is where Jesus called out to his first disciples to join him and become fishers of men. And they left their boats immediately and followed him. Dropped everything, left their boats, their careers, their livelihood to follow Jesus.
What struck me today in this moment is where Jesus comes to these men and says, "Follow me." And it's not even that it's to make them fishers of men, it's just these words, "Follow me." And what he said then is just as true today. Follow me. In the song, it says they didn't follow him for the sake of a creed or popularity or fame or anything like that. They just followed him because he called them by name. And he does the same thing today. He calls us by name. And he doesn't just ask us to follow him in the good times when things are going good. And he doesn't call us to follow him for the sake of blessings or prosperity or all of the promises in God's word. He calls us to follow him no matter what.
There's a very cool little church here named the Church of the Primacy of St. Peter, or Mensa Christi, which means Christ's table. I had to admit I had to look up the word primacy because at first I wasn't understanding the context, but it's really about commemorating Jesus' reinstatement of Peter's status in front of the other disciples. Jesus was appearing to his disciples at the top of these stairs, which was actually the shoreline in Jesus' time. Even though I mentioned the lake is nearly full, it's quite a bit smaller today than it was back then. The disciples were returning from a lousy night of fishing when Jesus called out to them to toss their nets on the other side of the boat, and of course, their nets were overfilled with fish. They recognized it was Jesus, and they ran here to meet him. Inside this church is a big rock, and this rock is where Jesus prepared breakfast for his disciples as noted in John 21, hence the name Mensa Christi. Now this event took place here after Jesus' resurrection, and if you knew about Jesus' crucifixion, you know that Peter had denied Jesus 3 times just a few weeks earlier. Jesus was now asking Peter 3 times if he loved him, giving him an opportunity for restoration from his 3 denials. Our guide, Iran, was fabulous, and he painted a great picture of Jesus saying to his disciples the last time he appeared to them in Jerusalem after his resurrection, "Hey guys, let's meet up at our place next time." Their place was Seven Springs. This is where it all started. I get asked a lot about what my favorite place was on this tour, and I think most of the times I give people the deer in the headlights look, like, I don't know. It was all awesome. Every place is unique. Every place has its own stories. Every place impacts you differently. And I would have thought something in Jerusalem was going to be like the high emotional point for me on this trip. That was what I preconceived in my mind before I left. Something like the Mount of Olives, the Garden of Gethsemane, Golgotha, the Garden Tomb, something like that would have been the highlight. It was this place. Standing on the shores of the Sea of Galilee and knowing what took place here and praying for our kids. I know God met us there. Just a mile and a half down the road from Seven Springs, we land at Capernaum, Jesus' hometown during his ministry. And as you can see, it is rich in artifacts. However, Before we get into it here, I want to head back to Seven Springs for just a minute to check out the Cave of Beatitudes. We saw this just as we were pulling out of the parking lot. This is where Jesus would go to escape the crowds and pray. Mark chapter 1 talks about his disciples finding him here. It's a pretty amazing spot, and the Sermon on the Mount was given on the mountain just above the cave. It was considered the most holy place and was visited frequently by the early century Christians. Today, very few take the time to visit, but definitely worth checking out. Now, back to Capernaum. Capernaum is also called the village of consolation, or to comfort. In biblical contexts, it's also called salvation or the village of salvation. Jesus preached in all of the synagogues in this area, but he also went out to Samaria, Tyre, and Sidon, which are highly populated by Jews, but surrounded by Gentiles. From here, his teachings would go out in all directions. The ruins of the synagogue that we see in Capernaum today are actually from the 4th or 5th century. It was built upon the foundation of the 1st century synagogue that Jesus preached in. One of the things I find fascinating about Israel is that new discoveries are being found all the time. For instance, these dark basalt stones have been identified as part of the pillars belonging to the 1st century synagogue just within the last 2 to 3 years. These are the only remaining pieces from the synagogue during Jesus' time. Many of Jesus' miracles written down in the Gospels were performed right here in Capernaum, such as casting out a demon in the synagogue, healing a woman with a blood issue, the coining the fish, healing the son of Jairus, the head of the synagogue. Need I go on? I do. Well, okay. Healing the servant of the Roman centurion, healing the paralytic who was lowered from the roof, Jesus walking on the water, and healing Peter's mother-in-law, something Peter never forgave him for. Just kidding. That's a joke. I love looking at the ancient ruins in Capernaum, and there are some very cool Jewish motifs that are on display that were common in those days, and still are today. A 7-branch menorah, a ram's horn or shofar, an incense chapel, and the Ark of the Covenant. Among the floral motifs with Jewish connotations are palm fronds, clusters of grapes, and pomegranates. There's also geometric designs with rosettes, stars, pentagons, hexagons. It's amazing we can still see them today. Another great site in Capernaum is St. Peter's house. It is well documented that Jesus called Peter's home his home in Capernaum. Right after Jesus' death and resurrection, the function of this house changed dramatically, with the main room being completely plastered over from floor to ceiling, something no other house in Capernaum had, indicating that this house was now being used for communal gatherings like, maybe the first Christian church building. This church survived more than 300 years before an octagonal-shaped church was built on top of it in the 5th century to commemorate its importance. Peter's house remained hidden until 1968, when it was rediscovered during an excavation sponsored by the Franciscan Church. Christian graffiti with the words Lord Jesus Christ and Peter, along with the symbols of the cross, have been found on the plaster walls. The excavation was completed in 1990. Is there anything better than a boat ride on the Sea of Galilee after a hard morning's work? Well, after a 20-minute bus ride, we arrive in Tiberias. The Sea of Galilee is actually part of the Jordan River. Once the river leaves the Sea of Galilee, it flows on for another 130 miles to the lowest point on Earth, which is the Dead Sea. The Sea of Galilee is 30 miles wide east to west and 21 miles long from north to south. The average depth is about 75 feet, with the maximum around 140 feet. We started off the cruise with the national anthem, which is pretty cool to hear in a foreign country. We had a choice of a 1-hour tour or a 3-hour tour.
A 3-hour tour.
We opted for the 1-hour tour. In Jesus' day, Tiberias was the largest city across the Sea of Galilee and the capital city of his enemy, the son of Herod the Great, named Antipas, the same guy that beheaded John the Baptist, ruled the west side of the Sea of Galilee. The west side of the lake was the Jew side. Herod Antipas was looking to kill Jesus as he thought Jesus was John the Baptist coming back to life. Another one of Herod's sons, named Philippus, ruled over the northeast part of the lake, aka the non-Jew side. His capital city was Caesarea Philippi, and we'll visit there on our next video. Everything Jesus did was right under the noses of Herod's sons. He never hid from anybody. Jesus performed miracles on the Jew side and the non-Jew side of the lake. Jesus fed the 5,000 on the west side of the lake and fed 4,000 on the other side of the lake. He cast demons out on the west side, and he cast demons out on the east side. And 2 miracles happened on the water, showing his power over nature. Miracles were not just contained in Capernaum, as I outlined earlier, but throughout all Galilee.
It said, then Jesus got into the boat, and his disciples followed him. Suddenly a furious storm came upon the lake, so that the waves swept over the boat, but Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him, saying, Lord, save us, we're going to drown. He replied, oh, you of little faith, why are you so afraid? And then he got up and rebuked the wind and waves, and it was completely calm. Completely calm. Mm-hmm. The men were amazed and asked, what kind of a man is this? Even the winds and waves obey him. Wow.
Thanks again, Pastor Ray. Here's a great shot of our group. Are y'all enjoying the video so far? Oh man, I love you guys. As we head back to Tiberias, we have time to take some last-minute pictures. Ever been on one of those trips where that one guy gets all the chicks? Just when you think this day can't get any better, we are headed to a restaurant for a St. Peter's fish lunch. I'm just going to let this scene speak for itself. A great lunch, and everyone enjoyed it. Well, except for maybe those that don't care for heads of dead animals on their plate. Welcome to Magdala. There is so much to talk about here that I cannot do it justice. In fact, I've had to re-record this entire section because it was getting way too long with all the detail I wanted to share with you. So, I'll start here. Magdala was discovered just a few years ago in 2009 by accident. During a mandatory archaeological test, the first blade that went into the ground hit a large stone that changed the purpose of this place forever. The blade hit what we know today as the Magdala Stone, and following that, the ancient city of Magdala was uncovered. This is one of the most important sites around the Sea of Galilee because it's the only place we can see a first century Jesus time archaeology. Remember, in Capernaum, the synagogue we visited was from the 4th or 5th century and was built upon the foundation of the 1st century synagogue. Magdala has been identified with the ancient city of Migdal, which means fish tower or the place of salted fish. In fact, Magdala was famous for its cured fish factory. Jesus fed 5,000 not far from this location with 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread offered by a young boy. I'm just speculating, but I think there's a good chance those fish could have been purchased here in Magdala. Magdala is also known as the birthplace of Mary Magdalene. She was one of several women that traveled with Jesus and his disciples during his ministry. She witnessed the crucifixion and was the first eyewitness to the resurrection. She was then commissioned by Jesus himself to inform his disciples of what she had just seen. Okay, so what's the big deal about this Magdala Stone? Geographically, it's been chemically confirmed that it came from Mount Arbel, which we saw from the windows of our bus heading to Tiberias, and it's made of limestone. You can see that Mount Arbel is basically in the backyard of Magdala, so that makes perfect sense. What it is a 3D symbolic model of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. All four sides and top are rich in symbology, and I get the impression that not everyone is in agreement as to what they mean. Our guide, Iran, suggested we look up an article written by Dr. Mordecai Avium, which I found online at Kinneret College, with the title, "The Decorated Stone from the Synagogue at Migdal." I'll leave a link below if you'd like to read it, and I'll give you his interpretation of that symbology. To view the stone properly, you have to think in 3D. The front of the stone shows us the inner hall of the temple and the oldest depiction in history of a 7-candle menorah. It looks like it's standing on a square object, but the belief is that the menorah is actually standing behind the inner altar, also known as the gold altar. There are 2 amphora, or vessels filled with oil, for the menorah. These items are under an arch and between 2 pillars of the temple. The 2 sides are identical. This view could actually be of the royal portico that Herod built. By thinking in 3D, what looks like 4 arches with some trees in the background of 3 of the arches and some round object in the 4th, those trees are actually additional arches from inside the basilica. Check out this view of what the portico may have looked like, and you can visualize what the stone is telling us. The round object is an incense vessel for burning frankincense, and it would hang over the altar and distribute the fragrance. On the back side of the stone, there are 2 spoked wheels representing chariot wheels. The objects above the wheels represent the chariot, and the triangles below the wheels are fire. There's a great description of a divine chariot found in Daniel 7:9 that matches this view. On the top of the stone, the first thing that jumps out at you is the rosette. 6 leaves at the center and 6 leaves on the side, equaling the number 12. The number 12 is very important in Jewish traditions, including representing the number of loaves that are placed on the showbread table in the temple. The 2 objects on the sides of the rosette are tools that were used to rake the ash and burnt bones off of the altar. There are also 6 pairs of objects that seem to represent the very symbolic way the 12 loaves were placed on the showbread table. Check out the 4 corners of the top. They appear to have edges around them that suggest that this was a base for either stone or wooden legs attached to a table. That table was placed on top of the Magdala Stone, and most likely this table is where the Torah was read. So what happened to the old city of Magdala? In a previous video, we talked about a tell being an archaeological mound that has been excavated or yet to be excavated. Usually a tell is a collection of layers upon layers of civilization, but that is not the case here. There is only 1 generation after Jesus' time that survived here. Magdala has been buried all this time under just 1.5 feet of soil. Here's where I have to cut the story short. In 66 AD, Josephus ruled over the Galilean area, and he fortified all the cities, including Magdala, against the Romans. The Romans sent 60,000 soldiers into the area, and under General Titus, they devised a plan to go around the walls and attack Magdala from the Sea of Galilee, which nobody expected. He decimated the entire city, and because of what took place here, the city was never rebuilt. Most likely, it was covered by a mud avalanche that came from Mount Arbel. The synagogue has been excavated over the past 10 years, and it's incredible. Nothing has been added to it. It's exactly as it was discovered. Incredible mosaic tile floors are still intact, and beautiful frescoes are still vibrant and colorful. Frescoes are watercolor paintings that penetrate the plaster. There's a large room with benches that was used for reading the Torah out loud. Other rooms were used for teaching the commandments as well as for ritual baths for purification. In addition, right outside the synagogue is a large market. There's even fish wells that would have been used for keeping their fish fresh. Can you imagine how crowded this would have been? Just a few steps away from the excavation site, an amazing spiritual center has been constructed that includes an atrium honoring the women of the Bible featured on 8 columns around the atrium. A boat chapel commemorating Jesus preaching from Peter's boat is a great place for worship with room for 250 people. There are also 4 mosaic chapels that highlight the public life of Jesus. Each of these small chapels can hold 30 people, and they express the loving power of God that is gifted to each one of us by His divine hand. The Encounter Chapel is amazing. The floor is actually the floor of the first century market in Magdala, and it's been designed to replicate the synagogue we just visited with 2 rows of stone seating with 6 columns around the perimeter and frescoes from the original synagogue. The highlight is a massive painting titled Encounter, which depicts the hemorrhaging woman trying to touch the hem of Jesus for healing. You can't leave this place without being touched yourself. We're on our way to a baptismal site on the Jordan River. We are so blessed to have amazing views of the Sea of Galilee as we head back through Tiberias to our destination. A camera just does not do it justice. So how many times in your life do you get a chance to be baptized in the Jordan River? What a great experience. And at the end of this segment, I want to share a unique encounter I had. Earlier in this video, we talked about the Sea of Galilee almost being full, and when that happens, the gates of the Jordan River Dam will be fully opened. Water rights are a political hotbed, and you don't have to think too hard to realize that there's political and environmental implications, and everyone has an opinion. In just the last 100 years, the water level of the Jordan River has dropped 97%. Just imagine what this river was like in biblical times. It was a rager. The last time the dam was opened was 25 years ago in 1995 for a total of 9 days. For the price of a cappuccino, we got a gown, a towel, and a certificate. It was the best deal of the day. Even though the water level is only 3% of what it used to be, it's still coming from the snow-capped Mount Hermon, and it's February. I'll let you do the math, and yes, it has a negative sign in front of it. And just for you, I'm bringing my GoPro along to give you a first-hand view of what it's like to be baptized. If you've ever been afraid of being baptized, I'm hoping this alleviates your fears. Baptism should be a celebratory experience. If you're looking for a church to join, find one that celebrates baptism. I think you'll be on the right track. Okay, I want to bring in my wife Cheryl to talk about her experience when I got baptized in the Jordan River. So just to set the stage, you were part of the crowd that day during the baptisms, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So how big of a crowd would you say there was that day?
I think there were a couple hundred people.
Excellent. So, what I want you to do is tell the audience what the crowd's reaction was when that dove came down and nearly descended on me when I was coming out of the water.
Pretty sure it was a seagull.
No, I don't want to be condescending, but that is no seagull.
You see the web feet? I think it's a dead giveaway. And that thing has a huge wingspan.
Web feet.
And they eat garbage.
Oh, we should have rehearsed this. Thanks for watching. This wraps up our day around the Sea of Galilee. And next time, we're going to be in northeastern Israel. We're going to start off at the Tel Dan Nature Reserve, then head up to Caesarea Philippi and the Golan Heights, and then back down to Mount Beatitudes. So that is going to be fantastic. If you like this, please subscribe to my channel. Give me a thumbs up down below, and we'll see you next time. Oh, and if anybody has a good optometrist, if you could send me a link, that would be great. I need to make an appointment for my wife. Seagulls. Jesus performed miracles on the Jew side and the non-Jew side of the non-Jew side of the lake. Just yes. There are two amphora. Dang. How do you say that word?
Amphora.
Amphora.
You didn't even get started.
Depended upon me when I got baptized. When that dove came down and nearly descended upon me.